1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Jane Thomson. Jane is the founder of the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society, a community of female wine lovers with a 10,000 strong membership participating in wine tastings, dinners and tours at home and abroad. Jane also founded Australian Women in Wine, and in 2023 was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia for her lead role in advocating for women in the sector. Before we get started, please remember to play your role in advocating against algorithmic slop, petty-mindedness and worse by sharing this podcast, clicking digital buttons of approval, perhaps even subscribing to Vininspo on Substack, and generally getting behind anything else in this world you'd like to see endure. Anyway, Jane and I talked about sexism and stereotypes of superficial savvy bee sippers, the 3 compulsory subjects of study in an imagined Nordic utopia, energy, engagement, entertainment, and how minding our language can avoid elitism and exclusivity. Revelations from the United Nations. Why owning your platform and doing everything IRL beats the illusory pull of social media. Lipstick, ice cream, and uplifts in downturns. Why wine businesses need to dedicate headspace to basic behavioural psychology. The life-changing lesson a teacher taught an insular schoolgirl. How not to serve up boredom and bugger-all sales at wine dinners. The insidious predictability of the fear-mongering anti-equity playbook. And how narrative is at the centre of connection. I started by asking Jane what she was like when she was just a fabulous little girl.
Yeah, look, I had a really interesting childhood. I went to 6 different primary schools across 3 different countries. So my dad was finishing his surgical training when I was starting school. So I started school in the UK and went to 2 different schools there, then came back to Australia for a few months, then went to New Zealand, then came back to Australia. So we were all over the place during my primary school days. I spent my final 2 years, though, year 5 and 6, at the same primary school. And then I went to the same high school for the whole period, and that was in the eastern suburbs in Sydney. So that's kind of the school origin stories of me, and I think that having that crazy eclectic education during my primary school years and having to form friendships quickly, get myself known quickly, has been an extremely informative thing in terms of who I am today.
What were your interests? What kinds of things were you into?
What was I into? Well, sport. I always played sport of some kind. Hockey, basketball, softball, netball. I tried everything no matter what school I was at. In the UK, I studied ballet for a few years like all little girls do, but I was far too ungainly for that, Ed. I was much better off on a field with a ball somewhere. And then I was really into public speaking and performance. And I really loved it, and I thought I was okay at it. And there's these great stories that my primary school friends will tell you, because I'm still quite close to a few of them in year 5 and 6 we went through together. And I used to write my own scripts and perform them as part of our school plays. But unfortunately, my parents were not happy people. They divorced when I was about 12 after multiple separations during those primary school years. They finally split permanently. And there was no one to drive me to drama class. There was no one to drive me to public speaking. That was a low priority now. So I actually became quite a quiet and insular girl for most of my high school years. I really withdrew. I didn't know what was happening, didn't know who I was. And I don't think anybody did divorce very well in the late 80s and early 90s. And it wasn't until I got into year 12 that something quite significant changed the course of my life.
What was that?
A teacher whom I had never had before in my schooling, but I had obviously interacted with over various things, advocated for the school staff to choose me to give the valedictory address to finish our schooling education. And It felt like she plucked me out of nowhere, and I took on the challenge and I gave this address, which, you know, it's school. It doesn't mean much to many people, but to me it meant a lot. And the social commentator, Hugh Mackay, was actually our special guest that night at the prize giving and school finishing. That night is still so fresh in my memory. So I gave this speech, I got a standing ovation, and then Hugh Mackay himself came up and said some extremely encouraging words to me that literally changed the course of my life.
Yeah, wow. What was the gist of what he said?
How amazing it was, how I should never doubt myself, how I should be putting myself on more stages and to trust my voice. That's kind of the wrap up. And even though I think I got off to a fairly shaky start on that front, if it wasn't for that night, for that teacher, going out on a limb, I would have to say, in choosing me, advocating on my behalf to the other staff, and then Hugh Mackay being there and saying those things, I don't think I would be where I am right now. And I think I often tell that story in different ways to different people, because I think it shows that there are clear instances in life where people can make a very big difference to your trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this was in Sydney, was it?
It was in Sydney. So I'm going to show my age here quite proudly. I was the class of 1994. So that's when that happened.
And was university always on the radar for you next?
Definitely.
Okay, so what subjects did you take and what was your plan? Did you have a clear idea?
I didn't have a clear idea, but another story I like to tell is that I thought I had a clear idea. I chose all my subjects all through my schooling because I was going to be an archaeologist. Part of starting my schooling in the UK was that my very first ever school excursion at the age of 5 was to the British Museum, where I fell in love with Egyptology, and I was going to discover the next, Tutankhamun. That was my goal through life. I was obsessed. I had all the Egyptology books, mythology books from ancient Greece as well, ancient Rome, anything to do with the ancient world I loved. I ended up doing 3-unit ancient history for my HSC at the time and did very, very well in it. But not long to go before we were due to select our university courses. I remember our careers advisor coming up to me and saying, "Janie, do you know what archaeologists really do?" And I was like, "Well, they do this and they investigate the old world and they bring to light new things." And she said, "Yeah, there's a lot of time spent on your own out in fields and in quiet libraries." And she said, I'm not really sure you fully understand that." I think she could see that I wasn't going to be that happy person in a quiet library or out on a field for days on end. And so literally at the last minute, I changed to psychology, and it was ended up being the best decision, because I finished a honours degree in psychology at the University of New South Wales, did really well, got a first class result, a high distinction result, which I was so proud of, given I wasn't even going to do it to start with. And then that has informed everything I've done since then. Best education ever.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk plenty about psychology, I'm sure, in this conversation. But how did that lead into your first job? Or your first job after university, I should say.
My first job was a Christmas fairy in David Jones, so that wasn't actually related to the uni degree. But that's an aside. I went straight into psychology, so I really leaned into language and behaviour. So my specialty area was around language. I did my thesis in language and how we process language. And I went straight into an organisational psychology role in Sydney. And we worked on Sussex Street in the city, which, if you know, Sydney is just up from the Slip Inn, where a couple of Danish monarchs met, and I literally was probably there that night. I like to think I was. We went down there every night during the Olympics after work. But, he chose Mary. We're good. Probably a better choice. And that's where I worked for a few years.
At this time in life, wine was sort of on the periphery, or already had been around you, hadn't it?
Yeah, so I think in the 80s, it was very unusual to have wine on your dinner table every night, but we did. And my dad was a member of multiple wine clubs. And when I was about 13, he started planting vineyards in the Hunter Valley. So even though after my parents divorced, he really wasn't in my life very much, I think that early exposure to the importance of wine around the table, the very few times that I experienced genuine good conversation and happiness within our family environment was when we were having a nice dinner with wine on the table. And I I think that's really stuck with me. And my dad still has vineyards in the Hunter Valley now. So it was something that I always think I've been around wine in an indirect way since I was quite young.
And along with the teacher you mentioned and also the influential comments of Hugh Mackay, were there any other role models that you had around you or inspirational figures that influenced you going through your university degree and into the first part of your career?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this in preparing for today, and not particularly during that time. That was a real survival time for me. I was head down, bum up, working really hard. I was self-sustaining, looking after myself financially. And I recently had a couple of uni friends come and visit for the first time in years and met my youngest daughter. And we were talking about those days, and she leaned forward, my friend, and said to my daughter, you know, your mum was the only one that worked. We all had scholarships or parents' money or support, and your mum worked really hard during those years, and she beat me at uni. And so that was really good for my girls to hear, but also just shows and reminded me how focused I was and that I probably missed out on a lot of the social stuff at uni around that time. Okay,
and when the change of career come and wine take a bit more of a central place in your life? It was a gradual thing, I take it.
Yeah, it was a really gradual thing. So it started with a move. So I moved to the Byron Bay hinterland from Sydney when my first daughter was born. So that was at the end of 2003. And of course, there's no need for organisational psychologists up here. There's no organisations big enough to employ them. So when my kids were little, I made a transition into more pure communications, because really what I was doing was communications and using language to influence behaviour. And that was the era of the .com boom, so the early 2000s. So everybody wanted advice around comms and language. So it was a great time to be able to freelance as a young mum and just sort of work within my bounds in that area. And I really, really enjoyed it. But as I got better at that and understanding online communities in their infancy and content creation and all that sort of stuff, I was always still an enthusiastic consumer of wine. And I was that girlfriend who people would hand the wine list to at restaurants or get people around to try some new wines I just bought. And I was expressing to a girlfriend that I was feeling a little bit dissatisfied, just kind of sticking in comms, and it was a bit boring, and I would really love to do something around food and wine. And she sort of said to me, well, Janie, why don't you do this? Do exactly this. Bring women together like you do anyway. Just find a way to monetize that. So like anything, it was an idea that went nowhere for a while. And then quite sadly, my brother passed away unexpectedly, and he didn't have a partner and he didn't have any kids. So his very small amount of superannuation ended up getting split between me and my other siblings. And just rather than put that on the mortgage or fix the car, which is what probably most young parents would choose to do, I saw it as an opportunity to actually maybe turn this idea into something. And so I finally got that little bit of money to give it a bit of a shot. And within 12 months, we were profitable and up and running. So it was we don't talk about luck or bad luck or the role of luck enough, I think, in life. And that was one of those situations where that was significant.
And so what were the first steps of the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society? What did it look like when it started, and what did monetizing it look like?
Well, it was the .com boom. I thought everything was going to be online. I thought we were going to have like an online place where women could ask questions, find out about wines. We could showcase female wine producers, tell their stories. And I just thought how easy that's going to be. Living on a farm that I do, running an online community was going to be perfect for me, Ed. But literally within a couple of months, people were screaming for an in real life experience. And so I thought, we're going to have to do an event. I knew nothing about events, nothing about event management. I had zero experience. And I thought, sure, how hard could that be? So we started and we ran our first event as a bit of an experiment in Brisbane, which is not too far from me. I thought it was easy to get to, a couple of hours. And it was a sellout boom. And so then, people in Sydney were asking for one, and then people in Melbourne were asking for one. So I learned on the job how to run wine dinners and wine events. And I had the assistance of a couple of fantastic women in the industry who gave me a little bit of assistance and some suggestions. But what I also discovered, having gone to a lot of wine dinners just as a consumer, is that I didn't want to do a traditional wine dinner. I thought they lacked energy, they lacked spark, they lacked connection, and they also lacked a real focus on supporting the wine producer. I was barely ever asked to fill in an order form or anything like that. And I wanted to work with wine producers where we could help them sell more wine. So that's where the monetization part came in. If I could devise an event style and a strategy that could help my wine producers make money, then I could charge them. And so that's how that started.
And so from the outset, there was always going to be both a focus on women participating and women wineries being supported.
Yes, not immediately 100%. So I wanted to support women wine producers, and that was a focus, but it became the sole focus after about 18 months, because I think it took me around that long to realise how dire the situation actually was, and that it did deserve our full and complete attention in terms of a business strategy. Until then, it was just something we were going to do. We would work with other wine producers, but we would, support and focus and showcase women wherever we could. But it became the sole focus after 18 months.
Yeah, and I'm interested in the fact that your focus was partly on that wine producer getting something out of it, because in my mind you see so much money being invested in events as the promise of some kind of support, where that money just seems to just go in a black hole and genuinely not have a hope of making that money talk for people who are involved in it. But the other thing is, it sounds like such an obvious thing to say that you wanted people to come to these things and actually be engaged and have a good time, but it is amazing how dull in general, even to this day, a lot of wine events are. So
absolutely,
what form did it take for you, that idea of, right, I'm going to show these people a good time and this is how I'm going to play a role in that?
So it required me digging back to my younger childhood self and finding where performance Jane had gone, because what I felt was that when I went to wine dinners, people really didn't know how to communicate in a way that was engaging, that wanted me to act, that had like a time limit on my ability to order or anything like that. And so I sort of went back to those early drama lessons I had and those early public speaking lessons I had and could remember. And again, I literally learned on the job what worked, what didn't work. I was very focused about format and timing and energy, and also showcasing a wine producer so that I could make them the center of attention, a little bit like the celebrity chefs we were starting to see on television at that time through MasterChef and everything. I just wanted to be the person who brought the energy, got everyone excited, and went, and here's the person you need to support. And I think that's unusual in the wine industry as well. You tend to get wine dinners hosted by the people who do it themselves, and it's to be a third party advocate is actually a really powerful position to be in.
It is. And what about the language of wine? We've had a lot of different guests on this podcast, and many of them, I suppose, are probably invited because I really do like the way that they communicate wine. But also there are lots of different ways to do this. And perhaps from the point of view you're coming from, where for many people it was the idea of getting people together and making sure they had a good time, there is always a crossover there, I guess, of where the wine experience and not alienating people, bring them along for the ride, and also perhaps dealing with different areas of exposure to wine and concepts within wine. How do you go about balancing that language, balancing that approachability across diverse people?
That's a really great question. I still don't know if I have it right, and I'm always perfecting what I'm doing. I think that you have to know when you walk into the room that you're talking to people at all levels of their wine journey immediately, and you should never talk down to anyone. But you should also never assume that the people who are much further along know everything. And I think there's a lot of assumed knowledge in the wine world. Often wine is accused of being a bit of a snobby area. I think the right word is elite. We tend to speak at a very elite level, assuming that everybody is at the same level of knowledge as we are, and that instantly leaves people behind. And so I think that not talking at the lowest possible denominator language, but also not assuming that people know something. So talking about the technical stuff, but providing a foundation for that, or an explanation or a definition for that every time. For example, a winemaker will get up and she'll talk about how that Chardonnay was left on lees for a certain period of time, or it was batonnage stirred or whatever, and that's great. She's having that conversation. But then I'll then come in and I'll translate that a little bit before I let everybody get on with their dinner. So, you probably heard Carly say, da, 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 da. For those in the room for who that's a new term for, it just simply means this. And often people who are quite advanced in their journey will go, oh my God, thank you so much. All these years I've pretended I knew what batonnage was, so... So it's just about making people feel included, not spoken down to, but also remove all these assumptions that people know what we're talking about. Provide the definition, offer the explanation along with the technical language as well.
I think that's such an interesting point. I think it's so true that in a lot of wine circles, people presenting and hosting tend to worry somehow about offending people. Perhaps they're worried that somehow it lowers the tone of an event to be inclusive in a way. in terms of making sure that people are actually keeping up and that what you're saying is hitting home in any way, shape or form. Apart from anything else, I don't think there's any arena where being welcoming, being warm and inclusive and accessible is actually going to be taken with offence by people. You know, there might be the odd person who likes to think that they only want to hear incredibly highbrow stuff and somehow they're being condescended to. But I think in general, just being nice is never going to be offensive to most people who go to those sorts of events.
I completely agree. I think being warm and welcoming is pretty much the ticket to life.
And so from there, just give me an idea, if you will, of how the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society has grown. How many members do you have now, and how many wineries roughly might you have worked with over that period?
Look, we've got 10,000 members and we've been at that number for quite a while. Not because I'm lazy and I don't want to grow. It's just at a nice size. I really like it at that size. It's manageable. I can manage it. And I've got a very clear vision of what success looks like in life, and running a big company that has lots of employees is just not in my wheelhouse. I just don't want that. So it's got 10,000 members, and that's members. So that's not social media followers, that's members. And then over that period, we would have worked with probably 30 or 40 wineries around Australia, which has been really exciting. And many of those have been with me the whole time. So I'd say at least 10 of those I'm still with today. And every year they sign up and do events because they know the ROI is so good. And I give them access to a brand new audience or customer base every time as well. And so interestingly, one of the wineries that I've worked with for a long time, Radis Estate, Emma Radis said to someone at an event not that long ago, she said, during these events, you actually get 60 or 65. That's my top number. I never go above that. That's another psychology question, Ned. We get sort of 60 or 65 people in a room, but it's never couples. So in a couples event, you'll maybe get, every second person ordering. But in this room, everybody's wanting to order. So it's actually you're talking to 60 individuals, which is really exciting.
Yes, and I'm sure with those winery partners, the fact that they are making connections through you, with you, means that there are other lessons I'm sure that they're picking up. Do you offer other services in terms of marketing or PR to customers? Is that part of what you do too?
It's not officially part of what I do, but it is at the same time. So for the wineries that I've been working with for a long time, I often do that sort of stuff. So for example, at the end of last year, I helped Bosworth Wines announce their 30 years of organic viticulture anniversary. It was hilarious because all year Louise had been talking about it's our 30 years this year, Jane. Remember we did our 25 years 5 years ago. Can you help us with the 30-year one? And it took all year, but we finally got there. Wineries are often so, they feel like it's not a story, or they feel like it's not something that people would be interested in or about, but they got lots of media attention for that story. And one of the little career moves that we rushed over earlier in our conversation was that when I was working in the communications area all those years ago, I worked in PR for a little while as well as part of that. So I did some freelance PR for a PR company that's up here in the Byron hinterland, and I learned a lot from that experience, particularly around creating media releases, distribution, relationships and that kind of thing. And having my profile in the wine industry be okay now means that I can reach out to most of the wine media and they'll take that call or they'll take that email. So that's a huge benefit to my wine clients where I'm doing that work for them.
You mentioned the elitist factor in wine, and one thing that always strikes me is 10,000 members. You rattle that off as though it's a small number and you're happy with it, but it's a big number and it's a lot of connections, and as you say, a lot of different sub-connections, I suppose, made there with your winery partners. I'm always very conscious of how that chain of connections works. At the same time, I don't really see that many people talking about or copying the model of the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society. Why is that?
It's a great question. No one's ever asked me about that before. And I don't know. I think that often we are looked at as being a bit fringe or a bit superficial. I mean, early in our journey, I regularly got asked by wine industry professionals who I was meeting at different things, so what do you girls do on a Friday lunchtime? Sit around and drink Sauvignon Blanc? That sort of really misogynistic off-the-cuff remark. And while I don't get those remarks anymore, I certainly don't think the attitudes underneath them have changed all that much. And so I think that we're not seen as important, or we're seen as not talking to the right crowd for a lot of brands. But I think there's a lot to learn from what we've done over the last 14 years. And some of our members, in fact, thousands of our members have been with us that entire time. Rarely miss an event. I've got members who have started with us in one city and moved locations to 2 or 3 times and are still coming and meeting like-minded women who enjoy wine at events in different cities over that time. So that personal connection, that feeling like you belong, and the opportunity to have a third-party person or a third-party company like us recommend and introduce wines, we've built that trust up over that period. And so I think being able to establish a community, have loyalty, build trust, and then show them how to buy could easily be replicated. And I'm quite joyous that no one has done it yet. But yeah, it's certainly not seen as something yet that's been important to the wine industry. And I still don't know why.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? I think I mentioned before we came on air about how the wine industry loves to pigeonhole people and concepts. And there's sort of this highbrow, middlebrow, lowbrow concept in wine. I mean, now it seems especially ludicrous, and it always would have, but now especially so, when all wine companies, and wine in fact as a category in itself, is wondering how to connect and grow its audience. You could possibly make a differentiation between who the populist customer is versus the highbrow customer. I mean, a customer is a customer, but not only that, within the community, are we not trying to bring people along for the ride, trying to get them involved in something, trying to bring them joy and show them something interesting? Doesn't it just seem bizarre that those connections aren't made more? And what do you think people could be a little bit more open-minded about in terms of making wine more relevant to people or making their own brand more relevant to people?
Well, we talked a little bit about this a few moments ago, but energy and connection are so important. And I think when you bring a really good energy to a space and you let people feel warm and included in that space, and you use language that's inclusive, and you use the opportunity for them to feel safe enough to ask questions. So you build a trust or a safety net around them so that they can finally contribute in a way perhaps they haven't contributed to before. I feel like you create a really special space, and within that community, that sense of belonging then starts to develop. And once you have a sense of belonging, then people don't want to leave that. It's something that they want to keep coming back to. They feel heard, they feel seen, they feel welcome. I mean, it's not rocket science, but I don't think we tend to do it very much in wine.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that keeps cropping up in the sort of marketing sphere is this idea of how to stand out. I mean, it's an incredibly crowded space, the amount of wineries in Australia alone. And one particular concept that I think a lot of people around the world are fixated upon at the moment is the fact that not many people define who their product is for and what it does that's different. Now, the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society obviously has a clear sense of that mission, but also this way in which wineries tend to get a little bit lost in, well, I've got to make a story up. What's my story? Who am I? How am I different? I mean, it's a fundamental question you would think for starting a business, but again, any tips on how not to overthink that and perhaps be more simple and genuine about who you are and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, straight away, do not talk about product. I mean, do, but don't. It's not about the product. There are 10,000 Chardonnays out there that I could go out and buy tomorrow. Why would I pick yours? I have to like it. That's the part that's about the product, but it has to be so much more than that. So you said, they have to understand what their product story is. I don't care about your product story. I want your human story. I want to be able to connect. I want to be able to understand. I want to be able to know why I need to choose you and your brand and you as a human over any other options that are available to me. And again, when I feel seen, heard, listened to, and that there's a sense of belonging there, you will engage me. You will engage my humanness. And you will make me then buy your products. That's almost a secondary thing. And the other thing is when you have a really strong connection to a brand, it's always, we talk about brand connection, it's human connection. So even the big corporate brands, what they're doing is trying to imbue human emotions into all of the things that they're doing so that you feel like you have that same connection with them, right? With Nike or Red Bull or whatever. You don't know anyone behind that brand, but they're forever using the same tactics to make us feel like we know there's some personality behind that brand, and that's what we connect to. The great advantage wine has is that most of the businesses in wine are small or medium. There are real people behind, and it's not hard to go and talk and to be a real human behind your product and to have that human connection with others. I mean, you don't see it as often these days, but politicians know the power of door knocking, of actually having a conversation with individuals and building their brand on an individual basis. We try and do all of that online now, but it's not the same. You can't do it all online. You've got to get in front of people and have those in real life conversations, but just stop talking about your product as much and start talking about who you are and what you stand for.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk as well about how wine is different from other things, and in a very good conversation conversation with Felicity Carter a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. We spoke about how, yes, wine is different in several ways. It's special and it's unique and it's a very interesting, complex category. But in so many ways that we forget about, it's also not different. Whether a wholesaler selling to a sommelier or wine buyer, whether a retailer selling to a customer, whether a sommelier on the floor selling to a diner, we are just people talking to people. And I think this is where we get into your behavioural psychology side, because again, I think people in the wine industry tend to compartmentalise this as well, in the same way I feel like they compartmentalise you and your business in terms of, that their wine is different or the customer that they're dealing with is different. But I'm sure there's a lot of simplicity in terms of, well, how do humans behave and how do you want to interact with them to make sure that you're both getting the best out of your transactions?
Absolutely. How do you want me to add to that? That's spot on. And I think that's where storytelling really comes into play, So, when I was at university, I was obsessed with language and behaviour and the way it influences us. And one of the dominant theories at the moment, and it's been around for some time now, regarding what it is that truly makes us human and different from other animals is the way our brains operate on narrative. We operate on storytelling. Storytelling is actually fundamental to being human. And your inner talk, the way we do therapy, the fact that if you're missing a key piece of information, your brain will fill it in to make sure that the story is complete. All of this stuff should be talked about more regularly, because if we understand that our brain operates on narrative and just how important storytelling is, we would all, as business owners or workers or just even as humans, spend a lot more time working on what our story is and how to make it compelling, how to make it engaging, and how to bring that other person into your world and get them to empathize with you, get them to connect with you. And if you're a wine producer, get them to buy from you. That can all be achieved with really brilliant storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, that word narrative is, I think, misunderstood sometimes, but essentially the way that we make sense of our own life is the narrative that we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
Again, with wine, there's this sense that some people have that what they have is somehow there's a truth or an authenticity within it that does all of the work, as opposed to how you communicate that as having meaning for someone else. I mean, isn't that just at the center of connection?
100%. It's literally the center of connection. So what's one of the first things we do to, little babies when they're born? We talk to them. I'm your mum. This is your dad. Here's this. And then we start reading stories to them, because what it means to be human straight away, even in infancy, is about what this story looks like. Who are the characters? Where are we living? What is the framework in which this story takes place? Everything has to do with storytelling. And one of the reasons that the US is so dominant in the world is not just because of their defense spending. It's not just because of their huge population size. It's because they're so good at storytelling and getting those stories out into the world. It's no accident that Hollywood has been such a huge vehicle for American storytelling, that they've dominated so many cultures with their storytelling. Storytelling and narrative is the same. For me, those are almost interchangeable things. And, the people who tell the best stories rule the world. It's no accident that from around the campfires in our most ancient of days, it was the storyteller that had so much reverence in our communities.
Yeah, when you were saying about the United States, their advantage, I thought you were going to say language, or the fact that those stories can reach people because of the language. That goes back to that point as well, that if wine has the stories, it has to know how to tell them and to remember that language is a key thing helping that story get across. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on some of the additional activities that have come from the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society. The first offshoot we had, 2015, the first edition of the Australian Women in Wine Awards. Tell me how that came about and why.
Okay, so I had got myself a copy of Jenny Port's book, Crushed by Women, which was, I think, already out of print, but I found a copy because I really wanted to read it, because I'd been operating for a couple of years at that stage. I could see, coming out of a couple of other industries that I'd worked in over the years, how dire the situation was in wine. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. My mind explodes thinking about how far behind we are compared to other industries. And so reading her book made me realize that this has been going on for a long time. Somebody's already written a book about it and still nothing's happening. There's no change. I was getting masses of pushback just by starting the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society. I wasn't getting support. I wasn't getting encouraged. A few of the women in the industry, absolutely, but the noise against me was very loud. And so I wanted to do something. I really wanted to take action that wasn't about building the business. It was about actually making a lot of noise to say, hey, this is not okay. This is happening in the Australian wine industry and it's not okay. And we need to do something about that. So I had to think about what that could look like. And I ended up at a conference in the US called the Global Women of the Vine. Now, like most things in the US, it wasn't global in the end. It was pretty much just the US and a couple of other sort of people like me who'd rocked up. But it was extremely informative because I got a sense that there was a groundswell happening in the wine industry, not just in Australia, but around the world. And so that emboldened me a little bit. And then it was on the way back from that conference that I thought, I think an awards program might be good here. And the reason I thought that was because awards bring in everyone. They don't just focus on women. When people are doing well, that company gets behind that person, male or female. So if you can showcase the successes of some women doing their job brilliantly, not only will that give them the attention they deserve, and we can tell those stories in a way that hadn't been told before, but we can also get everyone, men, women, everyone on side and putting their energy behind those awards so that it's not just seen as a women's thing. It's an everybody thing, and we are showcasing the great stories of the success of these women. And that's exactly how it unfolded. So it was a crazy idea. The first person I called was Jenny Port to see if she might be interested in assisting, and she was. And then I made a few more calls and I got an advisory board together because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it on my own. I didn't even have enough respect from the industry by then. I was just sort of upstart who was doing a chick thing. So I knew I needed to have some big names and some big kudos on board to make it happen. And they all said yes. So off we went, found some early sponsorship. And then there was no way I was going to be able to do a grand event like that with the smell of an oily rag we were running it on. So I thought, with one of the suggestions from our board members to maybe think about using this new fandangled online technology, why don't we do it online? And I knew how to do that. So we ran the awards program online for the first couple of years, which in fact proved invaluable experience for when COVID hit in 2020, because not only were we able to continue, but we were able to advise a few other wine awards how to do it as well. So we like to say that we pioneered the format and it accidentally ended up being very helpful.
Yes, did you, in the early days of those awards, you said that you didn't get much support because you weren't kind of anyone and it was just a chick thing for some people. I was just wondering whether at the time there was any, not necessarily pushback, but misgivings or misunderstanding around whether it was a good thing for women to have their awards and whether any of that came from women.
Absolutely. Yes, it did. And yes, it did. So there was pushback because women didn't want to be identified as female winemakers or female viticulturists. And my answer to that was neither do I. But until we reach a point where we're not in the minority, we're going to have to keep flagging this to indicate that you are there and that you are there in a minority situation. So we did get quite a bit of pushback. I'm not going to name names on a podcast or anything, but quite, influential people. Interestingly, and the most satisfying experience from running the awards over that time, we ran it until 2020, was that by 2020, some of those people who'd been the most vocal in the early days against us ended up either nominating themselves or someone in their business for an award. So for me, that was the full circle turnaround in their attitude over that time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm sure there are many reasons why that happened. But I also think, and I've reflected on this sort of thing quite a lot, that there are often moments in the culture that really do magnify when people think that it's a little, a couple of degrees out of kilter, that it just magnifies, actually, this needs a bloody huge shift. And I just wonder how much things like the Me Too movement, which happened in the interim, made that shift happen a little bit, that shit, it's not just a bit broken, this is fucked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the zeitgeist was with us because we launched the awards the same year or just before Me Too came in. So I 100% agree that we were riding the zeitgeist there, and that really helped. It helped expand our basis, why we were doing it, because, as you said, people thought it was a small issue or a non-existent issue, or honestly, lots of people I spoke to said to me quite openly, is it even an issue anymore? Is it even an issue? I can count off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top female winemakers in Australia. And I always would say to that, and keep going. Call me when you get to 20. And they couldn't even call me when they got to 10. So, just because you can see or you can name 4 or 5 people at the top of their game doesn't mean it's an equal playing field yet.
The old availability bias.
100%. Well named.
But no, it's true, isn't it? It's that idea that, we're going in the right direction, and then something happens that makes you go, oh my God, we've got so far to go. I know that the statistics aren't necessarily great around discrepancy in the industry between men and women in terms of participation and pay.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of indicative numbers just to give people a little bit of context on where we're sitting in terms of that picture.
So we don't have clear pay stats. They're not up to date, but there are stats around pay disparity. 2020, 2021, so that's 5 years ago. The average pay gap between male and female seller hands is $15,000 a year. The average pay difference between male and female viticulturists across 2020, 2021 was $18,500 per year. The thing with the winemakers is it's actually quite a scary stat. So in the 2013-2014 financial year, female winemakers earned $7,000 less than their male counterparts. But in the 2020-2021 financial year, female winemakers earned $14,000 less than their male counterparts. So it actually doubled in less than a decade.
Where are those stats from?
The ABS, Australian Taxation Office, and the ABS. But we do have stats that show from the universities that we don't have an attraction problem when it comes to getting women into wine. We've actually got about equal numbers of men and women graduating from oenology degrees here in Australia. We don't have an attraction problem. What we have is a retention problem. So within a few years, the number of female winemakers in Australia plummets to, it's currently 16.9%. That's great, because when I first started, it was 10%. So, to see some progress is great, but my goodness, it's far too slow. And then for viticulturists, it's a couple of percentage points below that. I think it's around sitting at 11 last time I looked. So it's actually really poor when you think about it. I mean, these women have gone in, given it several years of their life. They have worked hard for years. They have gone out and got some work experience, and within just a few years decided this is all too hard. I'm not getting supported, and they leave. And what a massive, massive talent drain that is on our industry.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about what has changed or what is changing or what needs to change. Perhaps wrapped up in that question is the fact that we do now have the Australian Grape and Wine Diversity and Equality in Wine Charter. So I was just wondering if you could highlight the work that's gone into that to get it to where it is, what its hopeful effects and impacts are, whether that is a stepping stone towards something else in mind.
Well, what's changing is that we're getting action from the very top industry level now, which is fantastic. So the fact that Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine have thought, okay, we actually need to do something is a brilliant first step. It's taken a couple of years. They've worked closely with Charles Sturt University to develop the gender toolkit, which is great. We need to have it, but my passionate stance is to actually get it implemented. So it's no good actually having great policies out there if no one is using them. And we've seen this in other companies and industries where they've got the policy bit right, but actually the implementation stage is where the attention and the money needs to flow. So I'm just really hopeful now that that's going to be the focus for Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine. They've done the hard work. They've put a lot of time, money and effort into this. How do we actually get wine companies to adopt it? And that's a struggle because most wine businesses are small. They're already doing 1,001 things. So how do we encourage people to actually use the tools that are there? I mean, for business owners, it's probably good to remind you that you've got the law overseeing you as well. So if you don't do some of this stuff, you can be reported and there can be serious consequences from an Australian law point of view. So I think the attention needs to be and the support needs to be given to people in workplaces, employees, so that they're aware of their rights, they're aware of what should be expected in a workplace. So that if that's not being provided or if they feel that better things should be being provided in their workplace, they actually have an opportunity to speak out and to speak up. And I think once they start doing that, you'll almost get forced implementation into workplaces because business owners and managers will be, hang on, what? And so there's that law piece hanging over their heads, which will actually make them have to act. But I think the energy and the money and the resources should be focused at this stage on letting people know who are employees, what they can do and what their rights are.
I guess within these forums that you've been part of, there is often an acknowledgement in the big scheme of things that there is need for change. There's often an acknowledgement too that change could be massively beneficial to whatever that larger body is.
Yeah. Yep.
And there are also ideas, pretty concrete ideas sometimes, on what steps would need to be taken to move towards a more equitable situation, a more diverse situation with more inclusion and all the benefits that could flow from that, from an economic point of view, from a brains trust point of view, from an empowerment point of view, from a democratic point of view. But then when push comes to shove, people sometimes see themselves missing out when that change happens. And I'm sure partly that's a psychological thing. I mean, yes, there are ways in which one action is going to affect others. But of course, we always have to deal with some kind of compromise in our lives. We don't get everything that we want. So how do you move from a situation where people have that realization that if something changes, it might affect me a bit, to, yes, but if it changes in the long run, I'm going to be a winner. We're all going to be winners.
So you're talking about short-term effects versus long-term effects.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah, so people are often too focused on the short-term effects, and also those are often unsubstantiated. They're fears rather than anything based in reality, and they're not focused enough on the long-term effects. So what we've seen in research everywhere and in countries who are actually living this out and industries who are living this out is where you have gender equity, you have benefits for everyone of all genders. So everything is more harmonious, businesses are stronger, business performance is stronger, workers are happier, retention rates are higher. It's like a win-win-win-win-win-win-win-win-win. There's no marker where anything actually goes down when you have gender equity. Literally every marker goes up. Yet somehow, as you say, people get caught up on this, but, if we allow change to happen, something might happen to me personally. And again, most of that short-term outlook is not actually based on anything real. It's usually just fears. And so I guess the deeper question is, how do you stop people getting triggered by their own insecurities? I don't have the answer to that one.
Well, that probably brings us quite nicely onto other big questions, because you have just come back very recently from New York, where you went to the UN as a delegate. Tell me about how that trip came about, what the subject was, and what you got out of it.
Sure. So, yes, it was an incredible week in New York last week. I was attending the 70th Commission for the Status of Women, which is held annually and wherever possible to coincide with International Women's Day in sort of early March. And the theme this year was access to justice for all women and girls. It came about because the work that I've been doing in the Australian wine industry over the last nearly 15 years has been recognised by UN Women Australia, who tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to be part of their official cohort joining them. And then, thanks to the support of Wine Australia and Australian Women in Wine providing some funding for that, I was able to attend. So I went with the mission of firstly representing the whole Australian wine industry, and I mean the whole. I'm not just representing women, I'm representing everyone there. And secondly, to gain insights for our industry from literally the cutting edge, to see what it is we can do, not just to expand and improve our gender equity toolkit and anything else that we might be doing in this space, but also just from an individual point of view, as humans, what can we be doing to help and support each other and help our own progress in this space? Because one of the things that I picked up very significantly in the week last week was that we can have all the policies in the world, all the workplace policies in the world, but we actually need to see gender equity at home as well. And so if you're going off to work every day and your workplace has good gender equity policies, which is great, but then you get home and actually the care is not divided by you and your partner, and then you end up you're doing, as a woman, for example, you're doing the average 70% of the household chores and he's doing 30%, and you're carrying all this mental load, and perhaps you have a sick parent that needs care, and perhaps you've got another caring obligation over here, and that's not being divided equally. Then if you're not having that gender equity at home, you don't have the energy, strength, and any other resources to be able to thrive in your workplace and make use of those gender equity policies. So you actually have to have both happening at the same time. So we have a society and a community piece, and we have a workplace piece, and I think that was probably brought together very strongly for me last week. Okay, and it must have been, on some level at least, very inspiring to be around other people who are fighting similar battles and believing similar things, and obviously, as you say, at the cutting edge of what they do. What were some of the other highlights, but what were also any particular things that set alarm bells ringing about where society's going? Sure. Well, highlights include the fact that it was inspiring to be not just hearing about things through the media, but actually in the room where policy decisions were being made globally and where people were really actively fighting for access to justice for women and girls around the world in various ways. I mean, the number of stories I could share are numerous, but, even just the accidental things like meeting a young female lawyer from the Ukraine in the lift on my way to a session and just having that chat about how she got there and what she was working on, meeting an incredible woman from Kenya while crossing the road at the lights and her journey to get there and the amazing programs she's working on in her culture and workspace in Kenya. So there was, again, these human stories that were shared as well as the really big policy things. But the terrifying thing I've come back with is the knowledge that the pushback against women's rights and against equity rights generally is huge. It's significant and it's global. And it's no accident that we're feeling it here in Australia.
Yeah, and this is a little bit certain a fear of, I suppose, those with power having it taken away from them. But it's a really slippery slope and one that's being greased by quite a lot of people. It is much bigger than the women piece, but it also feeds totally into it. What exactly are you referring to in terms of what that sort of playbook or what that slippery slope looks like?
Sure. So, look, the anti-rights movement is not new, but they've certainly got a lot wealthier and a lot louder in recent years, and they've also got a lot more coordinated. And it was spoken about quite extensively last week at the UN that, the top 3 anti-rights movement organisations in the world were funded more than every single feminist and LGBTI movement put together. So the money that's coming into these anti-rights movements is significant, and they know what they're doing. So they have a very strong playbook, and what they want to do is undermine anywhere where there's equity. And so where you've got existing wealth and existing power, people want to hold on to that. And they use narratives, and this was talked about extensively as well, narratives that are very compelling and very simplistic and are built on nostalgia. So they talk about defending our way of life or protecting our traditional way of life as though there's ever been a traditional way of life. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. There's never a marker on what that looks like. Which era are we talking about? The part before women could get the vote? The part where, which part are we talking about here? It's deliberately vague. It's very nostalgic, and it's very simplistic in its approach. So it's easy to understand. And they also, of course, stoke fear. So they make sure that they stoke fear into people. They make you feel like you're not being heard, you're not being listened to, you're not being welcomed into this room, which is all the things we've talked about earlier in this conversation. And where you're feeling like you're not getting those things, and then somebody comes out and says, I can provide those things to you, then that's what the right-wing movement is doing. So, you're getting the rise of people or parties like One Nation in Australia right now. That's not an accident. That is being well funded. Their narratives are being supported. They are being educated by those offshore as to what to do, who to attract, how to get big names like Corey Bernardi to join you, how to reach out to those big names and get them to bring kudos. That's all being orchestrated. It's not a conspiracy theory. This was being talked about extensively last week by policymakers whose job it is to look for this and to look out for this. So it's not a conspiracy theory. I don't want people thinking I've gone down some rabbit hole. This is real and it's happening because the money is there. The money is flowing, and they want to keep equity in societies low so they can protect power and wealth. And one of the most brilliant sessions I went to the whole of last week was one with the Nordic states. Now, when we think about the Nordic states, we should all be thinking about equity because they are a proven model in why equity is brilliant for society. And in fact, that was what their session was about. And they were there to proselytize or evangelize this message because they think the rest of the world needs to get on board. And, the Nordic states have shown that where you have gender equity, you have robust democracies, you have really strong economies, and here's the clincher, really happy societies. So Finland have won like the happiest place on earth for the last 10 years in a row or something and it's always Sweden or Norway that get runner-up position. They're happy societies. So where you have equity, you have all these win-win-win-win-win-win benefits. What you don't have is multi-billionaires calling the shots. You don't have people in huge wealth disparities. And so you don't have people living on the edge or the fringe who want to vote for people like One Nation. It goes away. And so, it was very eye-opening to see that there are really positive and really hopeful ways of dealing with this. And we just need to get that message out. We need to bring all the Nordic leaders over. They were so great. They were fantastic.
We're going to move away from One Nation and into a bit more of a Nordic bright spot with the end of this conversation, I think. First of all, talking about the Women in Wine Symposium, because that was something that came after the awards post-COVID. I think the first one was in 2023, was it?
Yeah, well done. So we transitioned after COVID from being the Australian Women in Wine Awards to just being Australian Women in Wine. And what else could we do? We had been doing some other activities during that period, but we wanted to get more strategic about that. And we felt like the awards had done their dash. They'd had their impact. This was a fresh start after COVID to do something different, to do something new. And so we thought we would gather people together because that was such a novel thing, wasn't it, for a while there after COVID?
And so what's been the upshot of those?
The reason for the symposium, I think, was, again, just going back to energy. I think that, grassroots movements, which is still what this is, tragically, after so many years, require energy. And I think you need to be around each other and with each other to help propel that energy along. So after a couple of years of not being able to see each other, we thought the most powerful thing we could do was to get everybody in a room together, and we weren't wrong. So it really helped propel a lot of things forward. It helped propel the new gender equity toolkit forward. It helped propel some male allies we had in the room to start acting. Their minds were blown. They couldn't believe what they were hearing, and it really transformed them. It helped propel even us, just the Australian Women in Wine board, to keep going, that we felt that we needed that energy to kind of carry us through. And it helped propel all kinds of micro actions in workplaces, which people were reporting back to us. So they felt like they had the energy and the support and the validation to go back and actually speak up, ask for change, put themselves forward, have a voice in perhaps ways that don't happen when you feel like you're isolated.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to something you said at the beginning of the conversation, actually, about how that one teacher had such a massive impact on your life. But I also think that these get-togethers, some people who aren't there often think of them as just being a bit frivolous, they're a bit of fun, nothing really changes. But change doesn't happen without them. As you say, there's nothing more important than being in the room when things are happening. It does have a bigger effect than a lot of the cynics might feel. And as you say, the energy to keep going, which is a really big thing, especially at a time when people are pretty demoralised about a lot of things in the wine industry and beyond.
Absolutely. And for me, energy is a massive part of everything I do. So it's come up again and again in this conversation through no accident. It's a really important part. I'm always thinking about what energy needs to be brought. If we're at an event, even something like the symposium or one of our Fabulous Ladies wine dinners, I'm thinking, do we need to bring the energy up? Do we need to bring it down? Do we need to hold it for a while? Who do we need to bring into this energy? It's a really important part of what it is to be human. And I think we were our own test guinea pigs during that COVID period for anyone who was a cynic about real life energy to suddenly understand just how important it is. Because Zoom, as fabulous as it is right now, it doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut being in the same room as other humans. And to deny that energy is such an important part of who we are and how we function is to deny really what it is to be human. And I think we function best. We've seen this so many times over and over in so many different ways. We function best when we're with and around other humans. We are literally a herd animal. We don't operate so well in isolation full time. And a lot of the stories around the backlash against women's rights that was brought up at the UN last week, a lot of the talk was around how a lot of that comes from, people on their own in dark rooms, in basements, on the internet. When you remove yourself from human connection and human energy, things can really spiral beyond reality. And I think it's great to place ourselves back around other humans and sort of be grounded and centered in that energy.
Yeah, well, this is another reason why I think it's quite ridiculous that it seems the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society, all those various things that you're attached with, get written off as some kind of rosé sipping frothy thing. Because a point that you made the other day has stuck with me. It's exactly what you've just said. but the onflow of that idea, you said you are everything IRL, everything in real life. Probably the most demoralizing thing I do at any time of the week is accidentally go via LinkedIn and see what everyone's talking about and how utterly soul-sapping that is. But everything in real life, it just seems to me that, you're a business owner and you've retained your independence, ownership, authenticity, all those things that people talk about a lot. But also, yes, you have to be online and social media is part of that. But the way that people throw so much time at social media in the wine industry, I think really does misjudge the illusory power of those connections. I feel like your mantra of in real life, or at least personal in some regards, goes so much further.
Yeah, sure. Well, firstly, let's give it the respect it's due. We have to be on it. We have to do it. We have to participate. All those things are true. However, they're less true than they used to be, I would argue. And the reason is this, because Meta have come out recently and been very clear about the fact that they are not showing your content to your followers anymore. They're showing some of your content to some of your followers, and they're also showing your content to non-followers in a way that they didn't do previously. So now basically you're just putting content out into the universe and hoping that perhaps some of your followers see it. Now, the upside of that is some people who've never heard of you might see it, and if they feel compelled to then follow you, great. Perhaps you've got a new person in your lead funnel that you might not have had otherwise. But it's not a way to communicate with your tribe in the way that it used to be. And so I think it's important for people to know that. And so we've talked about this on and off in marketing communications for the last 10 or 15 years, but it's never been more important to own your own platform and to use your own platform. And so, you've still got your email list, which is great. That's a fantastic online tool that I don't think wineries use nearly enough. If you are not emailing your groups, a couple of times a week, what's the point? But in real life will always trump all of those things. And so you can build a fantastic, strong, scalable brand by doing things in real life. It's your most powerful tool. And again, to use the politician example, it's no accident that politicians get out there and handshake and get to events and meet people and grab their hands and do all these things. They're trying to do exactly what you're doing, communicate a really complicated thing in a really simple way and get people to want to buy their product. And so politicians are way ahead of the wine industry when it comes to understanding how important in real life experiences are. But if you are going to be on social media, and we have to be, it's actually becoming more important than ever to be really great at storytelling and narrative. So whoever gets your message kind of comes into it very quick. I made a strategic decision some years ago, which you've just mentioned, which is actually to not be an online content producer. I barely spend $1 on creating content because you have to be schmick now to get your content seen. It has to be high quality. It has to be really amazing most of the time for it to be shown. And I didn't want to spend my money on that. I didn't want to rely on the online universe, which is constantly changing and constantly shifting, and I don't have any control over. So I deliberately, strategically decided to be the in real life person. And so that's why we doubled down on doing events. Again, remember my origin story, we were going to do everything online. Now we do everything in real life. So we would do events, and of course we do these wine tours now as well. So I can actually have people in real life for quite a few days together, which is a really powerful thing, particularly for wine.
Tell me a little bit about the tours then. What's a typical tour for you? Is there such a thing as a typical tour?
Oh, well, so yes. So we basically get a maximum of 12 women together, and we take them to a wine region and we show them around that wine region through the lens of the women producers. So whether that is in Tuscany, in Champagne, McLaren Vale, or in Margaret River, the focus is always the same, to focus on the female producers of that region and tell the story of the wines through them, and also have really strong connections made with other wine-loving women and with the female producers. So we ask them to be there in person. We don't want them to send their employee. We want that relationship to happen at the cellar door and spark there.
Very good. And in 2023, these efforts of yours won you, I'm sure it was a bit of a surprise at the time, or maybe not on the day, but at least beforehand,
No, it was.
the Order of Australia medal.
Yeah.
I know you don't do it for the kudos or anything like that, but come on, you must have been so chuffed.
I was, and I nearly deleted the email. So it came as an email and it looked like spam, completely looked like spam. So I just about deleted it. But I don't know about you, anytime I think something is spam, I always just double check the email address to check. And then the email address looked legit. So I was like, really? Okay, so then because they wanted you to click on a link, right? That's usually a red flag. So I did click on the link and sort of dropped everything, and my jaw went to the floor, and it was I had to accept I had to accept the nomination in order for them to award it to me a few weeks later. And so that was the first inkling that I had. It's still a huge honour. I still can't believe it. And I'm so proud to have that recognition because it really helps me get in the ear of other people who are not in the wine industry. It actually creates something where they feel like maybe I can be listened to and that I might have something to say. There's something quite powerful about having those 3 letters after your name in a way I didn't expect.
Yes, and I'm sure that you've been and continue to be underestimated in several different ways, but it must be quite helpful to have that credibility that comes from that sort of thing. Because, again, you're trying to do something genuine and sometimes you just need it, huh?
Oh, it was a good energy boost, that's for sure. So, and it came after a couple of very tough years, as I was picking up and starting again after COVID. It was only a year or so after that. So it was very nicely timed.
Yeah, and there's still a big step between winning an Order of Australia medal and actually being able to run Australia as though it were a Nordic country. If you did rule Australia as your Nordic fiefdom, psychology, civics and ethics would be a compulsory subject for everyone. Tell us a little bit about what that means and why.
Okay, so I think to build strong societies, you have to have really solid education. And I think we've got a fantastic education system here in Australia. But I think the 3 areas where it's really lacking is that we send people through school without ever giving them any psychology. Like no understanding of their own behaviour, why people do the things they do, how attitudes form. People just don't have this knowledge about their own human selves. And I think if they did, it would help with self-reflection. It would help with understanding why people are doing certain things. I just think it would lead to a much more stable and interesting and well-rounded society if we had that knowledge. I also think, just as importantly, we should have civics because again, democracies are strong when the population understands what that's about. And I think the New South Wales, they are thinking about that at the moment because they just did a study that found 70% of graduating Year 12 students had no idea about how their governments are run. And so that's becoming a talking point again. If you don't understand how things are run, how are you going to be voting properly? How are you going to use your voice properly? And then, of course, the one that is often taught at schools but is not compulsory and is often put as an adjunct to scripture or religion is ethics. And I think ethics is more important and bigger than just putting it as an option instead of scripture. I think everybody should learn ethics so we can be assessing why we're doing what we're doing. Is that the thing that really aligns with my values? What are my values? Can I hold 2 different values at the same time? All those sorts of things, which are, again, foundational for building good societies and for being really highly functioning humans in those societies.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice mix. And I think with psychology in there as well, I can see that perhaps bringing a bit more honesty, a bit less denial, maybe a bit more forgivingness as well. And I kind of feel like, you've answered this question because of what you've brought to other people and what they've brought to you in the Fabulous Ladies Wine Society. But I've asked quite a few guests about the importance of wine, not just in their life, but in the world. Now, obviously not everyone needs it, but what are those positive things that you think wine symbolises with all the darkness that we've spoken about and the darkness that we know is beyond? What is the bright spark that wine brings to the world?
Sure. Well, look, let's be honest, we don't need it, do we? Let's not pretend that we do, because we don't. We can absolutely live without it. But it's always a joyous thing. And I think it's something that also is a social thing. So you've got joy and you've got sociability in the one product. And that's quite rare. So for example, in an economic downturn or in a recession, do you know the 2 products that go bananas in terms of sales? Lipstick and ice cream. Because when things are hard, when things are tough, people want to bring a bit of joy into their lives in a low cost way. And so for women, rather than kind of going and getting all of the glam outfits and everything, they know if they can just have a good lipstick, things will be a bit better today. And for everybody, of course, ice cream is always going to improve everything. But I think wine has got that ability. So for a small outlay, $20, $30, $40, $50, you can actually have a brilliant, joyous experience, but it brings something that the other things don't, which is a social connection. So sharing a glass of wine with somebody and allowing yourself to have that joy together is something that I think is not unique to wine, but it's one of the things that makes wine really special. I also think behind the scenes of that, you've got real humans going to a lot of effort to bring you that product, as opposed to some of those other drinks choices that you have. You're beholden to the weather, you're an agricultural product. And so there's something that's grounding in that joy and in that social ability that perhaps doesn't exist in any other drinks product.
Yeah, and you like to bring the energy, but I'm assuming that you've also fed off an awful lot of energy that's been in the room when you've been there and wine and women winemakers have been involved.
Absolutely. It keeps me going. I mean, it's my joy to do it because I really, after an event or after a tour, I'm literally fizzing for hours, and it's such a joy to have all that energy together and to feel like just some small things that I've done have brought those people into the room together. I feel really excited about making that happen.
That's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and share it everywhere. Please don't underestimate the power of these endorsements in making it possible to produce original, thoughtful work. You can also subscribe to my Substack. That's edmerison.substack.com. For now, I'd like to say thank you to Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, Patricio Garcia for additional editing, and to my guest, Jane Thomson. Till next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers.